Welcome to the Rabbi and The Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Gurri, Dr. Red Shoe, and
Rabbi Yonason Goldson.
And we have two rabbis. I feel so blessed, and I've asked Rabbi Goldson to please introduce Rabbi Lapin. Sir?
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Daniel Lapin, who is known to many as America's rabbi. He's a noted rabbinic scholar, a best-selling author, and a TV host. For decades, he's been on a mission to bring Jews and Christians closer to their respective faiths and to one another. As a descendant of a prominent multi-generational rabbinical family, together with his background in science and business, he has a unique approach to teach the universal relevance of ancient Jewish wisdom. And Rabbi Lapin, I discovered you a number of years ago when I was driving to work, and I was listening to one of the prominent conservative talk radio hosts who was interviewing with a rabbi, and I thought, wow, this rabbi sounds like he really knows his stuff, and I don't say that about every rabbi. So I looked you up, and we have been in communication a number of times since then, and it's delightful to have you with us. And I'm going to let my co-host, Dr. Red Shoe, who's the real brains of the outfit,
No, I'm not.
give you the first question.
All right. So the first question, you're an expert on so many things, and we chose the issue of diversity. And I know that you have an interesting take on diversity. And you have said diversity is a moral imperative, which I love the way you said that, as well as demonstrably desirable in educational and commercial environments. Rabbi, sir, well, I'm going to have to figure out how to say which. There are too many rabbis here, so Rabbi, sir, will be you, and Rabbi Goldson, you'll just be Rabbi. So, Rabbi, sir, if you wouldn't mind starting us off with your take on diversity.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much. Years ago, I did a show. It was a live event, a road show. We took it around to a number of cities. It was called the Rabbi and the Jock. And it was
Which
me,
were you, sir?
along with, well, you'll know in a moment, along with Ken, the late, great Ken Hutchison, who was a linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys. He was an extremely large black man. And about the only things we had in common were our bald heads and our similarity of religious outlook. He was an evangelical Christian. I am an Orthodox Jew. And of course, the laugh getter at the start of every show was the master of ceremonies would start off and introduce us, and then he'd say, and I will leave it to you all to figure out which one is the jock and which one is the rabbi. So I say here that although I know who the shrink is and I know who the rabbi is, those two fields are remarkably close to one another, are they not?
Yes, they are.
And I've always found it interesting that Sigmund Freud spent a great part of his life trying to rid himself of his rabbinic heritage. So much to be explored there. But if I interview you guys sometime, then that's the direction we'll go. But since it's the other way around, I'll follow the question you raised. And I'll just say, Rabbi Goldson, thank you so much for having me. And I'm sure it was your instigation to invite me, because the shrink, I think, would never have even have heard of me.
However, I did hear of you from a Catholic priest. That
right. But either way,
And by the way, you were also on my list to invite. We each made a list of the top 10, and you.
And I've been called an instigator before, so I'm used to it.
Yeah. But anyway, no, I've been an enormous fan of your writing, Rabbi Goldson, for many, many years. You are very, very good at what you do, and I'm happy to be associated with you.
Well, thank you.
So that question is set up as a little bit of a paper tiger, because I do not believe that diversity is an advantage, and I do not believe it's demonstrable or provable that it is. And I don't believe that the word itself is even properly defined. It is one of the sacred idols of contemporary social and political life in the United States of America. It's one of the altars at which one is obliged to worship. And so I feel a little iconoclastic and just a little wicked at doing my best to utterly obliterate this particular idol. But first of all, I'm going to dismiss the skin as a complete non-starter. The idea that that my organization is improved because it involves and includes participants of different skin colors is primitive and tribalistic. I honestly thought I left that behind when I emigrated out of Africa a number of years ago. This is honestly the stuff of witch doctors. Now, the idea that different ideas obviously makes sense. I mean, brainstorming with my clone would be completely useless, because every time I came up with an idea, my clone would say, yeah, I thought of that as well. I know that. It's like telling jokes to your clone. He'll bounce in with a punchline every time you set up a great joke. So, of course, diversity of opinion, diversity of experience, but the notion that skin color automatically stands for culture and values is tragic if true, and much more likely to be complete and utter nonsense. And so, yes, if I'm brainstorming in my business and I'm trying to come up with a new marketing plan, if I'm working with a think tank and we're trying to, yeah, absolutely, people have different opinions regardless of their skin color. Very advantageous, because you want people who think of things that wouldn't occur to you, regardless of their gender and regardless of their skin color. None of those things play any role whatsoever. Those are purely physical characteristics, which don't interest me in the slightest. The only people they would interest are companies that try to sell swimsuits and hire models. A job for which I applied once and was declined, which I took as prima facie evidence that anti-Semitism is alive and well still in the country, and so I insist that for any organization in that shape, but a diversity of opinion and view is an advantage. However, for any membership organization, such as my family or my tennis club, or for that matter, my church or my synagogue, diversity of opinion is poison. It's absolutely toxic. I don't want different opinions regarding the values of life in my family. If my children grow up with a set of values entirely different from mine, I am an abject failure as a father. It was now independence of thought, in creativity, in outlook and ideas, but not in values. Values are paramount, and I see no advantage to diversity in values whatsoever. In my synagogue, right, I'm a member of an Orthodox Jewish synagogue. It would make absolutely no sense at all, and would certainly make me and most other people uncomfortable if every time there was a get-together, it devolved into an argument about values. The whole reason that we are a voluntary association along the lines foreseen by the founders of this country is precisely because we share certain outlooks and we share a system of values. We do not want to debate them afresh every time we get together. So I think that, in a nutshell, is my disparaging view of the current use of the term diversity.
Now, Rabbi, I'd like to encourage you for the rest of this interview to not sugarcoat your opinions, but to really tell us what's on your mind.
I'll try.
When it comes, I like to use the term intellectual diversity. I spoke a few months ago at a online summit for diversity, equity, inclusion, and I was really quite surprised and pleasantly surprised how many of the Black speakers articulated that racism is not really an issue of black and white. And I actually cultivated the term rather than systemic racism, I was calling it systemic otherism, that we have a natural fear of a natural tension that arises when we encounter people who are different from us. Mm. And to your point that common values are critical for a community, it's really quite fascinating to me that in so many ways, and this really is a more universal principle, but in so many ways, we are caught in this tension between trying to find common ground, trying to establish common values, but at the same time, celebrating, recognizing the differences that can make us stronger. Partnerships are built on differences. Right? The good doctor and I were just talking before we went on how she has a particular skill set and a particular perspective that's very different from mine. And that's what provides a successful team. So how I understand the application of your point, which is very much my own, is that the arbitrary value of superficial differences can ultimately become very toxic. Whereas valuing individuals for their unique perspectives and their contribution to creating a broader range of understanding, of input, can be extremely productive and beneficial.
Well, I think then my father had often said, I'm from Cuba, and my father was a Cuban Spaniard, had dual citizenship. And then we became American. And one of the things he was often confounded by was that Americans cared so much about skin color. And he said, there are people, we want that people to have certain, now he was a classist, so everyone's prejudiced in various ways. His things, they have good manners, you know how to think, you know how to talk. His whole thing was breeding, how you're brought up. Do you know how to disagree? Do you know how to express your opinion? Things like that. He said that he thought Americans missed the boat and missed a lot of talent pool. And then he thought they confused this idea of diversity by now having quotas and stuff to make up for the past, so that we're going to go for these superficial things and say, see, we're equal, or see, we fixed the problem. So address that issue, please, of my father thinking we missed the boat. And how do we get to a point where we can better value talents and education and individual ways of thinking about things that further any discussion? Please address that, Rabbi Sir.
Doctor, I'd be happy to, although I start off with a certain inbuilt sense of respect for your father, whom I've obviously never met.
Me too.
But, sorry?
Me too.
Because, first of all, I'm an enormous fan of all things Cuban pre-Castro, like Cuban cigars, for instance, and there is no doubt in my mind that a large part of what I personally view as the political health of the state of Florida owes a great deal to the culture brought by Cuban immigrants, who I believe did so much to shape the landscape socially, culturally, and political in that.
Well, thank you Thank you for saying that. I think it's true. And Cubans, we are a little bossy bunch, and so we do tend to take over.
And in general, many would be better off if they just let the Cubans take over, to tell you the truth.
Well, so, it's interesting. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So yes, I didn't hear you say anything in the name of your father that I would disagree with. I think that we radiate our values by the way we behave, the way we interact, the way we carry ourselves, and much is reflected even in something so apparently trivial as Rabbi Goldson being dressed appropriately for this occasion, and me being inappropriately informal, for which I apologize. But yes, how we dress and how we speak and how we interact and almost every aspect of our day-to-day living is a reflection of our inbuilt values or utter absence of such values.
Well, I'm going to defend your honor. It is the rabbi's doing and my doing that you did not feel like you're dressed appropriately, because you dress quite appropriately. Next time, we've made a mental note to warn everyone of how we dress. So no offense taken, and you look great. You look ready for any audience, sir. That's my take. So this whole issue of making up the difference. So for a long time,
I have to interrupt you. I'm really sorry, Doctor, but there's an old Jewish story which is so true that it must be absolutely true. But it was an Israeli diplomat who showed up at an important state event in Jerusalem with a tattered pair of khaki pants and a T-shirt. And the Prime Minister of Israel walked over to him and said, will you take yourself home immediately and come back when you're properly dressed? Who told you to come like this? And he said, I have the permission of the Queen of England to dress like this. And the Israeli Prime Minister said, excuse me, he said, don't you remember when you had me in London as part of our embassy staff over there? I attended a garden party at Buckingham Palace dressed just this way. And the Queen herself came over to me and said, Mr. Cohen, you can't dress like that here, but dress that way when you're back in Israel.
Oh, there you go, with prejudice at its best.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Context is everything. You know, one of the points I like to make when talking about this topic of diversity is in Jewish law. We needed 2 witnesses before the court to convict a person of a crime. And 2 brothers were not allowed to testify together. So even if you had Moses and Aaron coming to give the 2 most respectable, reputable Jews in the entire society, they weren't allowed. Why not? Because when you grow up together in an environment, there's a concern that you're going to have the same, today we call them unconscious biases, the same perspectives, the same way of looking at things, and those innate values and acquired values will shape your perception. So there won't be that diversity of perception that's necessary to establish a baseline of credibility. So we need to have people coming from different points of view to avoid the groupthink, to avoid those preconceptions, so that we can get a broader picture, because that's usually going to be more accurate.
And on the other side of that, Rabbi Goldson, interestingly enough, I mean, the difference is obvious, of course, but the commander of a group of small special forces teams operating in Afghanistan told me that were it possible, there are laws that prohibit it for fear of causing undue loss. These go back to the Second World War, maybe the First World War. He said, but ideally, if we could, we like having brothers on the same team because less communication is needed. They intuitively know what one another are thinking and doing.
There's always an advantage. Let's go back to the issue, though, of making up the difference. I think where Americans are trying to right a wrong. And I love the idea of that being an important issue. generations of wrong. It's still there. When I came to this country and I went to this school, there was a box that you checked white or black. I didn't know what it meant. Yes, I didn't know what it meant. I'm old. So it was just, many years ago. It was, I came to this country in 1960 and I was 4 years old. So you had to check a box. I didn't know what it meant. So the teacher said, check black. Later on, I asked my dad, what was that? And I understood now that I was black. So I thought I was black till I was 7. That's a separate story. But I was treated like one of the black girls, which meant less. So we were sat in a certain place. We were treated a certain way. And the subtlety of being treated differently because of a perception of race or skin color. Now, I am not black, but I get really dark. I have olive skin. I get really dark and tan. And I think otherness is what they wanted to say. The usual and other, was maybe what they wanted.
As Rabbi Goldson pointed out.
He did. He pointed that out beautifully.
Was your mother Spanish heritage also?
Yeah, we're all 4 grandparents are from Spain. So everyone is, has the white skin. Some are slightly lighter than others. The
good news is you can check off the Hispanic box, I think.
I am Hispanic and Hispanic and Hispanic and Hispanic. All 4 quadrants of me are Hispanic.
Well, it's like I'm African American. In fact, I might be the only authentic African American you're likely to talk to today.
Yes, you are African American. And then
on my radio show, a caller once called in and she got on the line and said, "You're a liar." And I said, "Well, that's a little of an unusual way to start a conversation." What do you mean? And I'm in my mind, I'm mentally cursing my call screener. And she said, "Well, I've heard you say on the radio many times that you're black, and I'm looking at you, you're as white as I am." And I said, all of a sudden it dawned on me. I said, "I've never said I'm black. I've often said I'm African American, which I actually am." So
and Charlotte brings up an interesting point. She says, "Why is it important for you to note that you are not black, doctor?" The important part is that because some people thought of me as not black, I got to hear the background story of why they treated me and other people when we were black a certain way. So not being something or not being perceived as something gives you that perception. And inside scoop, I mean, they'll talk openly about why they're treating people a certain way. So that's the important part. I got both sides of the story. It doesn't really matter what my skin color is. It matters that I was privy to 2 different experiences. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the important part. So back to that issue. So what is one to do if we're trying to make things right? If skin color was a source of great harsh treatment and unfairness, what is the role of fixing that in a diversity conversation? Sir, Rabbi, sir.
Yeah, Doctor. No, I'm thinking of your question. It's now become a characteristic of intellectual discourse that there can be no cultural appropriation, either in externalities or even in ideas. And so it becomes highly questionable for a white person to give an opinion on Black society or Black culture, and presumably for a Jew to give an opinion on things that don't pertain. The whole thing is, again, tremendously primitive and tribalistic, and without any sense at all. But on the question of making it right, I'm answering without giving this the careful consideration that should be its due. Your questions are not simple, and so with the proviso that I could probably quite easily be argued out of this, I think I'd start off by saying that life isn't fair. That is a fundamental principle that I've learned from the Torah, which is that the classical biblical Hebrew language possesses no words for false concepts. And so I like to point out that there is no idea or word for retirement in biblical Hebrew. It doesn't exist because there is no point at which a person should withdraw from productive and creative life and go and play golf. And I'm happy to see from the bookcase in front of which you sit, Doctor, that retirement is not on your short timeline.
No.
So that's good. There is also no word for fair, so much so that that in Israel they actually don't have a Hebrew word for it, and so they have to come up with, my kids seem to have been born with this phrase, like they literally come out of the chute knowing the phrase, but that's not fair. No matter what my wife and I did, that's not fair. So it took a few years of careful education and acculturation for them to know that fairness is not a concept valid in the Lapin household. And so in Israel, little kids say, "Ze lo fair." The first part of it is Hebrew for "this is not," and then they have to fall back on the word fair. So there's certain things that are not fair. That's all there is to it. The fact that I am never going to be able to conduct a major orchestra and probably will never dance the lead on Swan Lake is kind of unfair. But, I just wasn't given the talent for the first, or the body and talent for the second. There are a lot of things in life that aren't fair. But I think the reason that the word doesn't exist is because it's outside of our purview. In other words, not fair according to what matrix of reality? Like, what are you talking about? What does that mean even?
Well, but if we're talking about something like slavery or treating people differently because of their external, the skin color, eye color, height,
right.
Whatever.
It's obviously it's repugnant and reprehensible. And until the end of the certainly until early in the 19th century, it was practiced by almost every single society on earth. When a Lieutenant Decatur in the early 1800s, very early 1800s, I guess, went to the Barbary Coast and attacked the Muslims of that era who had been plundering Western ships, they found not hundreds, but thousands of Christian slaves, of Europeans that had been captured and enslaved in horrible and humiliating conditions. Slavery was a reality, just as the bubonic plague was a reality of life in earlier years. And I think the reality now is that, in my view, we do no favor to anybody by encouraging a very natural human tendency, which is to attribute all the challenges that we all face in life mistakenly to something that was done. I think it's very important that we note that at the end of the Egyptian slavery, there is a very strange set of instructions. Doctor, is it okay if I refer to a biblical verse?
Yeah, do what you need, sir.
And so there's a talk there of a special ceremonial meal that had to happen. And it had to happen in a patriarchal home. It had to happen in a home built around the father. And the reason for that is because one of the terrible fatalities of slavery is the destruction of the nuclear family. It always happens, and it happens for obvious reasons. And so the chief restoration of normality following slavery and on the eve of the Exodus was to reconstitute the nuclear family around the absentee father, around the father who is now restored to his position at the head of his table. Hugely important. And but that was it. And then from then onwards, there was never anything no other mention of Egypt, with the exception of a ruling, an astonishing ruling: be kind to the Egyptian because you were a guest in his country. Yeah, not willingly. We were slaves in his country. Yeah, be kind to him anyway. You know why? Because that is the antidote to resentment. And resentment is no valuable luggage to carry with you on your journey forward to brightly lit uplands. And so, yes, I think that we have to accept the unfortunate realities of the past. And and I think that on an individual level, it's certainly fine and appropriate for an individual to decide under whatever circumstances in his environment, whether it's a place of employment or a place of education, to decide to make allowances for somebody. But but here's the biggest problem of all. And in this, I quote the incredibly astute and knowledgeable Black economist Thomas Sowell, who points out that that Black social indicators such as education, earning power, marriage formation and maintenance, family stability, children born into illegitimacy, and so on, all of those factors were better in 1960 than they are today. In other words, it's not the result of slavery that we have certain levels of dysfunction, not predominantly, but certainly very visible in the Black population. The blame is probably not appropriately placed as much on slavery as on the government programs that did so much to destroy the stability of the Black family in the 60s and the 70s. In other words, financially incentivizing women to have children as long as they didn't have a husband. So I guess what I'm saying is that whether the white man is the villain, or whether oversized government and its desire to do good without any unintended bad consequences was the villain, the bottom line now is, I think, not so much putting right as moving forward. And that's certainly, when I think of people who became financial tycoons. And by the way, the Cuban population provides ample evidence of this as well. But I'm thinking of young Jews, like the person who started CVS pharmacies, for instance, who came to this country as a teenager after watching the Germans murder his parents and siblings in Auschwitz. He was a child. He saw this, arrived as a young person in America, unable to speak English, without a penny, and psychologically shattered, and then became a tycoon who started his own family and has many grandchildren. This was not done by him obsessing on the injustices perpetrated by the Nazi regime. And so I think that, what I say to everybody all the time is, don't try and take my money to make things good. Take my values. And I don't mean mine particularly, but the values of Judeo-Christian civilization at its best. Take those values and move forward in happiness and prosperity and good health. But this obsession with trying to make the past right, it just may possibly lie outside the realm of human feasibility. And certainly so many Cuban businessmen with whom I've worked in Florida, who arrived penniless and again not knowing the language, I think their approach is the way to go, and that's to be forward-looking, not backward-looking.
Several ideas come to mind. I'd just like to try to quickly mention two of them. One of the really great, giant figures of recent times is Nelson Mandela. And what I think made him so extraordinary among other things, is that after his long personal suffering, 27 years in prison, hard labor, and he came into a system that was profoundly corrupt and unjust. And his whole message was, let's move forward. Let's not try to punish the villains. Let's try to create a cohesive society that we can all
an extraordinary personality, no question.
And to your example of the Cubans, there's a story of a fellow, I believe his name is Joe Flom. He graduated Harvard Law School, I think it was back in the 50s, maybe even the 40s. And as a Jew, he couldn't get a job with any of the prestigious law firms. So he joined a small law firm started by a couple of other Jews who also hadn't been able to get jobs. And they wanted to really build up their practice. And so they went looking, what is an area of law that is not part of the big corporate businesses. And they fixed on something that was sort of marginal at the time, corporate acquisition. And he ended up building a massive international law firm with thousands of employees, billions of dollars in business. He became incredibly successful. Why? Because he said, I'm not going to spend my time, as you said, Rabbi, I'm not going to spend my time fixating on the unfairness of the system. I'm going to figure out how I can make the most of what I have. And certainly every society, we need safety nets. We need to help those who can't help themselves. We have to have systems in place to help even the playing field, as long as it's not at the expense of people who really were not complicit in creating the unfairness to begin with. And as one of my modern heroes, Jonathan Haidt, says, when you emphasize differences too much, you end up perpetuating discord and creating tribalism and preventing the kind of success that we all need in order for all of us to benefit together.
No, it's exactly right. And interestingly enough, in Hebrew, the word for blood shares the same etymological root as the word for to resemble, dam domeh. And the idea is that at the blood level, we're all the same. We're all people. And I think that is interestingly reflected by the fact that blood is actually fungible. I mean, nobody asks if you're black or white or male or female or Scandinavian or African when you give blood or when you need blood. We're all the same when it comes to blood. It's in the area of the intellect, it's in the area of the spirit, it's in the area of values that we express our uniqueness and our specialness. So yeah, I think you're exactly right on that.
So going on I notice we're running out of time. So going on the theme of moving forward, Rabbi Sir, and then you, Rabbi, what is a good way to move forward? Give us 1, 2, or 3 action steps, including thoughts that might be an action step, for anyone who wants to have great input into a great society.
I think Samuel Johnson had it right, which is that it's not so much a case of having input into the society, but it's actually a case of, I think Aldous Huxley said it as well, you got to take care of yourself. Don't try and change the world. Try and change you. Because you don't have the ability to change the world. It's grandiose and presumptuous. It's not going to happen. Are there occasionally rare and unusual people who did change the world? Of course. But for most of us, as Samuel Johnson said, never is a man more innocently employed than when trying to further his own interests. And nothing could be truer, I get terrified when I hear recent university graduates say that they want to go into government to give back. every person who goes into government is just another 10 fingers in my wallet, to be honest. And doing, the idea that that's giving back, when government employees are literally the highest paid people in society today, with the most lavish and generous supportive packages. But people do it all the time. I want to go into government. And I strongly discourage that. I tell recent graduates, go into business, because government can take money from people by force. Businesses can only get money from people by offering something that people regard as of greater value than the money they're paying. Otherwise, they wouldn't buy the product or the service. And so I think, what I teach my children is nothing is anybody else's fault. The name of the one individual who has done and will do more than anybody else to hurt you is the name on your driver's license. You are your own worst enemy. Now try and conquer that. Overcome your own worst tendencies. And you don't have to worry about anybody else at all. Build up your own self-discipline. Build up your self-awareness. Build up your own sense of personal vision and destiny. That's all you have to do. Don't look to others, not for negativity or for positivity. Just focus on becoming everything you can become. And it's irrelevant what the obstacles are, because we all have them. We all have obstacles. It's just that skin color has emerged as so loud at the moment that it drowns out all others. And I'm quite sure that young blacks, not only here, but also in Europe, in Scandinavia, in the United Kingdom, I know that young blacks grow up young, believing that white people jump out of bed every morning with a smile on their face. It's not true. Everybody has baggage. Everybody has challenges. Everybody has problems. And the answer is to not blame anybody else, only look at yourself and go as far as you possibly can. I know it sounds trite, but it isn't easy, but it is true.
I think absolutely. And I'll echo the same point, but you remind me of a story from college. I was working as a peer counselor, and there's a fellow I worked with. He was a wonderful fellow. I mean, he really one of the bright, cheerful, upbeat, just unassuming, wonderful personality. And his plan for life was to go to India and to be one of the poor, so that he would make way for someone else to take his place among the successful. Well, one day I noticed that he didn't seem his chipper self, and it seemed to go on for a little while. It just so happened I had a conversation with another one of our counselors who told me what I believe was the reason for his sort of fallen face, as we say. He had expressed to her this plan of his, and she said to him, you're going about it exactly backwards. Because if you put yourself among the downtrodden, what you've done is you've created more downtrodden. She said, my plan is to be as successful as I can be, to move out of the middle class, which will allow others space to move into the middle class. And apparently she made this case so compelling that he reconsidered his whole plan, and that's why he was going through this bit of angst. Yeah. But in Judaism, as you well know, we have this concept called tikkun olam, which translates as repair the world. And it is very commonly misinterpreted and misconstrued, as George Carlin would say, save the whales, save the snails, save the trees, save the bees. I mean, that's all fine. But what it really means is, I am a world, and I'm the world I'm responsible for. and saving, repairing the world, saving me. That is how I make the greatest contribution to saving the world that I live in.
Yes.
Because as you said, ultimately, that's the only thing I do have control over. And part of that may be volunteering for Habitat for Humanity and being a social justice warrior. But it really is the question. It's like love your fellow as yourself. It starts with you. It starts with me. First, I have to love me, and then I can love you. First, I have to make my bed, and then I can go make the world a cleaner place. First, I have to take responsibility for being the best person I'm capable of being. And that is how I make the greatest contribution to the world I live in.
Yeah. And that's
important point.
That's it.
Sue has a comment. She says it's absolutely the best session that she's attended. Thank you. And she thanks you, Rabbi Lapin, as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And then she says, I love people that are willing to put a real stake in the ground and defend it, not just tiptoeing around, afraid of offending anyone. Love it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's not often one has the opportunity to engage in this kind of conversation. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, good. That guarantees you'll come back for the other two topics that we can talk about, right?
I hope so.
We just love having you on. I think these are difficult issues to grapple with, but I'll come down to when I thought it was unfair when I was this little Cuban girl and getting hit with rocks and stuff for being Cuban. And my father would clean me up and whatever. And then he would say, now what's your plan? And as I got older, the plan got more and more complicated, but I veered into, I was going to change the world. I was going to fix people. And he would laugh and smoke a cigar. He said, tell me how that's going to work. And he says, you know, the best way to fix people is to start with yourself and then be kind to people. Give people an opportunity to be their best by not letting them say things that that are ridiculous. He didn't say it that way. He was more well-spoken than that. But his whole thing is mind yourself. And that's what you're saying. You know, look at yourself, be the best you can be. And it's so much easier for me to work on you guys.
Yes,
you know?
That's a really good point.
Two white rabbis, good on diversity. Let me attack you guys, and then I don't have to face my contribution to it, right? And I think it's easier to come on attack rather than really have a conversation about diversity. So one comment I'm going to make about diversity is I often work with groups who want to be creative, whether they're designing cars or coming up with marketing plans or how to get more members in a membership organization. And the biggest mistake many of them make is they put people in the committee that all think alike. So if you want members that all think alike, then maybe that's a good thing. But if you want to increase the diversity of your membership, if it's one of those kinds of groups,
yes,
then get people who you hate the way they talk and you don't want to listen to them.
Absolutely.
As long as they know how to talk kindly and softly and productively.
Yeah.
I think people sometimes have disruptors for the sake of disruptors in a group. That's not productive. It's productive for me because I get called and I appreciate that. That's more business for me.
Yeah,
but having people who disagree with you in a thoughtful, polite, productive way, I think that's one of the keys to intellectual and opinion diversity that both of you rabbis were addressing. So
and that brings us to the word of the day.
Yes, dun da 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 dun. Okay, what is it, sir?
Which is irrefragable. I'll say it again, irrefragable.
And it's in the chat now.
Not subject to being refuted, disproved, or disputed. And I think, you know, that this phenomenon we mentioned, which is one of my real pet peeves, is groupthink. You get people together who are too like-minded, and we're all certain that we see things clearly. And it's fascinating that when the Sanhedrin, the High Court, would rule on a capital case, if they all agreed the defendant was guilty, they wouldn't issue the death penalty because they were afraid if nobody finds anything in the merit of this defendant, it's a good chance we miss something. And better to risk letting a guilty man go free than to risk putting an innocent man to death.
Yeah.
And the benefit of diversity is this diversity of thought, of perception, perspective, the willingness to debate and discuss. and not assume that our preconceptions are in fact indisputable, but have that willingness to at least look and try to understand the other side of the issue.
That's very nice.
Well, Rabbi Lapin, I mean, I could listen to talk to you for a long time, but we've come to the close of this episode, and before you leave, we're going to get you to come back. We're going to find 2 other dates. But rabbis, how about some final words of wisdom on the issue of diversity?
Rabbi Goldson, after you.
Well, I just want to reiterate the point I already made, because I think it needs reiteration. We have this expression that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If you have a symphony orchestra, you don't want all violins playing all the same notes. It will resemble music, but the word shalom in Hebrew, which is often translated as peace, I believe is more accurately translated as harmony. It's when all the different parts fit together and work in concert with one another. That's what diversity is all about, is we're all supporting one another. If the violin decides he wants to play the oboe's part, it's not going to work. And if you try to get everybody to play the same notes, it's not going to work. It is the differences that create real music, that create real harmony, that create real peace and true beauty. That is what we want in our lives.
Yeah, well said.
Is that your last word?
Oh, me too. I thought we'd all ride along on your insight. Oh no, I would just say diversity is valuable provided 2 conditions are met. One is we're talking about intellectual diversity, not diversity of skin color, which is primitive and tribalistic. And number 2, that it is diversity within a framework of unity, because if we don't share anything at all, then all we're going to do is be at loggerheads and argument. And the tribes of Israel were a description of that, where both at the end of Genesis, Father Jacob, and at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses, both of them blessed the tribes. Now, if I was writing the book, I'd have saved a lot of ink. I'd have had Jacob say, you know what, boys, you've been a real pain in the neck. You caused me nothing but aggravation. I'm going home to the Lord. I'm gone. I would have done it in 1 verse. The Bible takes 30. And with Moses, I would have said, the last 40 years have been hell. You people are really, I've had you up to here. Joshua can handle you now. God bless, I'm going home to the Lord. And again, instead of that, Moses gives, 30 verses, each separate individual tribe. And what we find is that Jacob's 12 sons, Moses' 12 tribes could not have been more different, diversity personified. And yet it was always within the framework of a particular divine spiritual heritage. So diversity with unity, I think, would be my slogan. Not diversity by itself, but diversity within a framework of unity. And I think it's true in this country as well. We speak about diversity. If we all agreed on the fundamental exceptionalism and goodness of the United States of America, and then we said, but we have different views of how to carry forward and improve, that would be one thing. But since this country is made up of people who do not agree on that fundamental premise, we're simply no longer one nation under God. So, it's I'm somewhat pessimistic, I'm sorry to say.
Well, I'm not. I think we can keep at it. I'm not sure that we're ever going to get it right, but I'm not sure that's the goal. I think the goal is to realize that we're human and flawed, and to keep learning from ourselves and from others, and to find better ways to find the pressing problems of reality.
Sounds good. Hoist the banner. I'll join your team.
All right. Well, we need a logo, and then we're good. All right.
Well done, Doctor.
I'm not a pessimist. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think it's doable. We're all disappointing in lovely different ways, but we all have many things to add if we just learn how to think about them and share those ideas so that we can make a difference. I do believe.
You're really making me feel better. Keep at it.
Well, good. Then I'll make you flan. All right.
No extra charge.
Flan will make you feel better. I mean, really,
Yeah.
It's all about the
kosher.
dessert. Yeah.
Can you make it kosher?
Yes, I can actually.
I'm sure.
I have the kosher recipes for many of the Cuban recipes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Rabbi. A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I appreciate being with you. And Rabbi Goldson, wonderful to see you. And I really appreciate so much everything you do and everything you write. And I'm proud to be associated with you. Thank you.
As are we, Rabbi Lapin. I think it's wonderful. We're just honored that you're here, and we will turn off the video and stay on and see if we can corral you into 2 other dates. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next Tuesday for the Rabbi and the Shrink, and can't wait to see you all again. Thank you.